Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, ready to have fun because Joe Heshmire is here with us both hours. And it's a drop call. Ask me anything. That is, people called to ask anything, but they didn't stay on the line. Either they didn't stay on the line or we didn't keep them on the line. Something happened that these people didn't get to ask their question on the air. But we looked at the question and we said, put it in the file because we like that question. It's interesting. Joe Heshmire, of course, is an apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of many wonderful books, including The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, The Eucharist is Really Jesus, Pope Peter, and a whole bunch of others. Also, he's the podcaster behind Shameless Popery, which has taken the world by storm. People love them, some Shameless Popery. Joe Heshmire, welcome.
Very grand introduction, of which, once again, I am not worthy, but I'm grateful to be here.
You don't feel like it's taken the world by storm? You don't feel like this?
I mean, there are a lot of things that have taken the world by storm. That's a pretty high bar.
I feel like there's,
I don't think I'm in that
in media, there's the
million.
Avatar movies, and then there's Shameless Popery. It seems to me that we have those two phenomena that are the bedrocks of ours.
Yes. I think typically people, when they're ranking like the biggest cultural moments in media, those are the two that they... Occasionally the moon landing footage, just to round it out.
Well, if you want to throw that in there, I don't know if that's quite up to Shameless Popery level, but okay, whatever.
I mean, they're taking steps.
Just one small step. You're the guy that wrote The Early Church is the Catholic Church. You didn't. It's not even like, this is what I like about the early church, this Catholic Church. It's not even like, the first 500 years where we can really show the because of course people will be like, of course the 500 years,
Right.
You did the first 200 years basically of the Catholic. You didn't even get within 100 years of Constantine.
That's right. And Constantine legalizes Christianity in the early 300s, and then late in the 300s, it becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. He's not born till 272. So the quotes that we're looking at in that book, when we were looking at the writings of the earliest church fathers, are people who could not possibly have been influenced by Constantine because he was not born. He did not exist.
Right.
Not just he wasn't emperor yet, he was not even an idea in his father's mind.
And his father was a great Roman soldier, right? Wasn't his father a general, or was his father also the emperor?
Yeah, his father kind of co-ruled. There was, it was kind of but he ruled in Great Britain.
I'm more on his mother's camp. I like Helena.
Yes.
I've got by the way, a great novel that people can read is Evelyn Waugh's book, Helena. I think it's just called Helena. It's a fun read. It's his take on Helena. Of course, he makes her British. Because he's British. But there is
Constantine's father, he was known as Constantius Chlorus, which means Constantius the Pale. So even by Roman standards, this guy was...
So are you saying he might have been British? Is that what you're saying? Like, I don't know if that's how you...
Yeah.
All right, but here, I got a question for you then. An opening question before we get into the other ones. You're the guy that says the early church was the Catholic Church. I see Pope Leo now. He lives in the Vatican. It's this enormous enclave with giant walls around it. He flies around in a jet airplane. They've got Michelangelo. I don't know. He painted the walls of one of their. He's like, this is Michelangelo painted the walls in this place. So if the early church was the Catholic Church, why do we have a Catholic Church today that doesn't look anything like Peter, Andrew, James, and John, all of that?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with that because it's not true that it doesn't look anything like it.
Okay.
But it is obviously true that there have been a lot of changes. Mm-hmm. Even, you mentioned airplane travel, but even if he drove to work, that would still be pretty different than.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot of changes because there's changes in the world. There's going to be a lot of changes in technology. He has a Twitter account, which the apostles didn't. Those are obviously not knocks against this being the church founded by Christ. The fact that we're using new forms of technology to spread the gospel. If that's your argument, that's a bad argument, right? So then the argument is just, this is like a big and grand church rather than this really tiny one. There's two things there. The grandeur, you can get into an interesting debate about using money for the glory of God, like building beautiful churches. And on this point, I think the best argument is in the Gospel of John, when Jesus' feet are anointed by Mary, or his head is anointed by Mary, and Judas complains and says the money could have been used for the poor, Jesus rebukes him for that objection. That using the money on God is actually not a bad thing. And using the poor as an excuse not to do good things for God looks more like the Pharisees than it looks like anything else. If you remember their whole Korban exception, that you can, just reallocate money to not do the things God has told you to do with it. So that's one half of that. But the other half is just the largeness, the grandeur of the church in the sense that it's an enormous church. It's got over 1 billion people. That's a huge church.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, it looks nothing like the tininess of the early church, but that's exactly what we would expect. Jesus compares the kingdom to a mustard seed, the smallest of the seeds that's going to grow into the largest of the plants, the mustard tree. So the idea is that you're going to take this very tiny people. And if you go back and remember in the Torah, the reason God tells Israel he chose them isn't because they're so big and strong, but precisely the opposite, because they're small and weak. And he wants to show his glory by bringing salvation in the world through a small and weak people. And so he does this. And then he does this again when the new covenant is inaugurated by taking a small group within that small group. But he doesn't want to just leave it a small group forever, because the promise from the beginning was that through Abraham, all nations would be blessed. That the salvific mission of God isn't just for a small subset of a small subset. That the salvific mission of God is to make disciples of all nations. And so we should expect to see a church that doesn't just look like a little seed anymore. It's instead one that is supposed to look like a tree. So when people boast of having like a small, pure church, where they boast of having a garden that has wheat and no weeds, read Matthew 13 and you'll see that's a false church. Because Jesus is quite clear, number one, that the true church is going to be large like the mustard tree. He's also clear that it's going to have a mix of weeds and wheat, that there are going to be wicked people within the church who even do damage in the church, but that if we tried to remove all of them, we would end up removing some of the wheat as well. It's right there in Matthew 13. And if that's not enough, he gives us in verse 47 to 50 this parable of the church as a net containing good and bad fish. So once you understand that, you realize that the church looks maybe not like what it looked like in the first century, but it looks exactly like what Jesus said it was going to look like in the future.
There you go. Thank you very much. Joe Heshmire is our guest. As I said, Shameless Popery is his podcast. A great place to learn about the early church is his book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. We've got a whole bunch of great questions that the caller wasn't able to stay and ask, but they gave them to us. So we're going to get them answered right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool and your homeschool co-op, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel. Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN. Visit today.
Joe Heshmire, apparently he knows rap lyrics. I didn't realize that you were quoting a rap song. Is that what happened during the break? Is that why
Darren asked
I
me
didn't
to
get the
turn
joke?
down. He asked me to turn down my volume, and I said turn down for what? And then Sai is trying to understand what that means.
No, I didn't understand why that was funny to people in the booth, but I guess it's because it's hip hop. I didn't. Was it a hip hop reference that I did not get?
Yeah, and actually kind of an old one, kind of a dated one. It was.
I'm old and dated.
I think a revealing moment generationally for both you and for me, unfortunately.
I think the last hip hop song that I really know is Double Dutch Bus. So I think
Nice.
I might be slightly out of the loop there. Although no,
Fat Boys have some good stuff, you know. They've got some good EPs, you know. Just
some
saying.
EPs. Yeah, okay. All right, let's see. We've got a bunch of great questions from people who were not able to stay on the line. So let's have some fun, and I'll give you those.
All right.
We've got one from Logan Sport, Indiana. Is that I'm going to look that up. Ari.
They're just choosing random words out of a hat.
I know.
and naming
That
some
doesn't
of
feel
these
like a
towns.
real place. But on I'm going to look up Logan Sport. But Logan Sport
Is it Logan?
Logansport?
Logansport?
Maybe it's Logansport. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe ChatGPT decided to fix things for us.
You know what? It's all one word, and it's on our sheet as two words. And I think
it's probably a town called Logansport, Indiana, not
Yes.
Logansport, Indiana.
Yep.
I will get to the bottom of this while you're answering it, Joe. Ari was in Logansport, Indiana, watching on YouTube and asked, "Can Catholics use the title Christotokos alongside Theotokos?"
Yes.
You're going to need to explain the question.
I can give yes.
There's a lot of people who are going to go, "What?"
Like, I can't use either of those titles. I don't know what those mean. So in the controversy over Christology in the early church, in the controversy over what's called Nestorianism, Nestorius said that Catholics shouldn't refer to Mary as the mother of God. The Greek Theotokos is literally God bearer, but we translate it in English as mother of God. That instead we should call her the Christ bearer, Christotokos, the mother of Christ. Now, we would happily affirm that Mary is the mother of Christ, but she's also the mother of God. So the question isn't whether Christotokos is true. Everybody agrees that it is. The question is whether we can say Mary is the mother of God. And occasionally you'll find even Protestants today who will say, no, we can't say that. We can't say Mary's the mother of God because that would be implying that she is the originator of his divinity. And the answer to that is, number one, no, it wouldn't. And number two, Jesus is God. So if Mary is the mother of Jesus and Jesus is God, then Mary is the mother of God. It's honestly that simple. She's also referred to in Luke 1. Elizabeth refers to her as the mother of my Lord. But my Lord in that context is referring to Adonai. It's referring to this being God, not simply a human earthly Lord. And so if you try to say that she's the mother of Jesus Christ, but not God, the second person of the Holy Trinity, then you've separated Jesus into two people. You've got, the man Jesus and the God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. And that's a problem because Jesus is one person. He's not two people. So this thing that on the surface looks like a fight about Mary is actually a fight about Jesus. It's a fight about whether we understand Jesus to be one person or not. And it's a real problem if you don't. Because if you don't think he's one person, if he's just two people, a human guy who cooperates with God, then he's not our Lord and God. And Thomas, when he cries out, "My Lord and my God," upon seeing Christ's wounds, was wrong to do so. And so you can see the problems that Nestorius' view creates. So having said all of that, the church was right to reject Nestorianism as dangerously false. But Nestorius was right that Christotokos is true. Mary is the mother of Christ. That was not a disputed point. So it's actually a point of agreement. The whole question is, in addition, Mary's also the mother of God. And anyone who denies that has a poor Christology.
Ari, from Logansport, Indiana, I looked it up. It is Logansport. And I feel ashamed that I didn't realize that because it is the home of a Batman museum. They have a Batman museum there.
I would have thought Wolverine.
Logansport. Boy, you are quick, man. Nothing gets by that steel trap. Also, it's in Indiana. It's just northwest of the town of Kokomo. Would you like to sing?
No, I was trying to think if there was a good way to work in Logan's Run reference. I thought that might be good for you.
Oh,
but I decided against.
Because I'm old? Because I'm over 30? Is that why?
I mean, I'm just maybe this would be a more generationally appropriate reference.
It is a cool movie, though. All right, I mean, you can make fun of me because it was a big deal when I was a kid, but also it's a cool movie, so get over it.
There you go.
Part of it is filmed in. If you go to. Okay, now I'm going to tell you something about Logan's Run. This is great. If you go to Fort Worth, Texas, not far from Trent Horn's house, they have these water fountains that were built in the 1960s, I think, and that's where they filmed the end of Logan's Run. Like you can pretend to be Logan running at the water fountains.
Nice.
There, yeah, it's very cool.
Did we not go there together?
I mean, it's not the Batman museum, but it's cool. We were there together? Yes, I guess that's probably...
Founders Weekend, yeah.
Yeah.
We went there together.
Yeah.
More facts like this. This is our new Logan sport.
Okay. Hakeem was in Dallas, Texas when he called, and he was listening to EWTN Live Radio.
He's driving distance from Fort Worth.
He could get over to Fort Worth and go to see where they filmed the end of Logan's Run.
He doesn't even have to drive. He could literally run.
Yeah, just run over there. Do that, Hakeem. Look, I feel like I'm kind of like the salesman for these places. Like I know people are going to visit Logansport now because the Batman museum is there, and people are going to be like, "What? The end of Logan's Run was filmed in Fort Worth?" I feel like I should get some kind of cut of this kind of stuff. I'm like the what's the thing when they? Oh, no, I forgot the name of when you have the thing in your town that sells your town. Chamber of Commerce. I'm like the Chamber of Commerce. Hakeem, can I do the question now?
Sorry, I've got one more Indiana Batman
here we go. Okay.
point. Okay, so you've got the Batman Museum in a place called Logansport, which obviously should have been the Wolverine Museum. But if you stay there in Indiana, you could go to Fort Wayne. Wouldn't that have been a better place to put the Batman Museum?
For Bruce Wayne. Yes.
Exactly.
I'm
not 100% sure it's named after him, but that whole area is kind of Wayne's World.
Getting a glimpse into the mind of Joe Heshmire today. Can I do Hakeem's question now? Hakeem is an important person who called. All right. Question from a non-Catholic family member, Hakeem says. How does Mary intercede for us if she's not alive?
The answer is she doesn't intercede for us when she's not alive because she is alive. Maybe that was too confusing of a way of wording that. But Jesus is approached by the Sadducees who similarly press him on the resurrection of the dead and the status of those who've died because they denied the resurrection. They only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible. We don't have to get into kind of the whole controversy there. This is in Matthew 22. And Jesus tells them, you are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. And then he answers their question in verse 30 about marriage and the resurrection. And then he says, and as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. So anyone who tells you Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are dead doesn't know the scriptures or the power of God, because that would make God the God of the dead. But God tells us that he is instead the God of the living. So we have to believe Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and furthermore, all the saints, are in fact alive. That the nature of death is that your soul and your body separate temporarily. You are not just your soul trapped in your body. You're not just a body with a spirit in it. You are the union of soul and body. And so when you die, we can properly say that you are in your grave. We can also say that you are, God willing, in heaven with God. Those two things are both true because one is referring to the location of your body and the other is referring to the location of your soul. And so there is a real sense in which you are dead bodily, but you are alive in the more important sense spiritually, that you are conscious, you are aware of God, and furthermore, you're aware of what's happening on earth. We see the angelic beings in heaven praying and offering intercession. So, for instance, in the book of Revelation, you get this quite clearly. You have the angels offering prayers with the golden bowls full of incense. This is the living creatures and then the angels before the altar. And in Revelation 8, we're told the smoke of incense rose with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel before God. And so then you say, okay, well, so sure, the angels are alive in heaven, and the angels are offering intercession with the prayers of the saints. Now, there's two ways of reading that. This is either, number one, they're offering our prayers up, they're interceding on our behalf, presenting our prayers before God, or you can read that as number two, that they're offering the prayers up of the saints in heaven who are praying. Or you could say it's both of those. And I don't think either of those, I don't think you have to choose either one of those readings, because both of them make sense. But furthermore, we know for a fact that the souls in heaven are aware of what's going on, and they're praying for us, because staying in the book of Revelation, actually 2 chapters earlier in Revelation 6, it says, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who'd been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. So notice here, the souls are in heaven. You'll find some heretical groups like the Seventh-day Adventists, and Luther kind of entertained this idea as well, of saying maybe you have soul sleep, or the souls are not around, they just don't exist until the resurrection, in which case God would be the God of the dead. But that's not true biblically. So we see the souls in heaven under the altar, and they cry out with a loud voice. This is verse 10. O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before thou wilt judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. So notice, when it talks about rest, this means something like the Sabbath, where you are refraining from work, you are resting from activity. It doesn't mean rest like you're unconscious. Like when the Sabbath is a day of rest, that doesn't mean you're just like knocked out for 24 hours. So they are resting in heaven, but in the biblical sense, not the heretical modern sense of like soul sleep. And they're aware of what's happening because God is talking to them about the ongoing injustices on earth, that there are wicked men who still haven't been punished for martyring the Christians. And so given this, we have to believe, number one, that the souls of the righteous, the saints, are in heaven with God. And number two, they are still praying in heaven. When they're crying out to God, that is prayer. And they're praying to God for things going on earth. Now, the last point here is this means that they're part of the body of Christ still. They don't cease to be part of the body of Christ when they're fully united with Christ. They're more part of the body of Christ than they ever were before. And we have a duty as part of the body of Christ, whether we're on earth or in heaven, to intercede for one another. St. Paul says, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all men. That's 1 Timothy 2. Like when he refers to Christ as the one mediator 4 verses later, he is not undoing what he says there. Christ's unique death on the cross doesn't mean that he's our only intercessor, because we're all called to be intercessors. This is why Paul asks for prayers and why he prays for other people. It's why we pray for other people, why we ask for prayers. And this is true whether we're talking about our brothers and sisters in Christ here on earth or our brothers and sisters in Christ in heaven.
Hey, there you go, Hakeem. Thanks very much for the call. Sorry we weren't able to talk to you. But you can give us a call another time, and we'd be happy to talk with you. This one comes from Ohio City, Ohio. Callie was listening on the Catholic Answers app, Joe, and she's asking because her husband is not a Catholic, and he asked her, if the Eucharist is truly Jesus, body and soul, why isn't it open to everyone? And why are priests allowed to determine who receives it? Callie wants to know, how do I answer?
Yeah, it's a good question. Partly this is just understanding what it means to say the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. Because take this as a starting point. I'm not going to explain like the case for this being true right now, just because he's kind of saying, okay, if that's true, then what follows? So if you've got a question about whether this is true, that's a question for another time. But right now, recognize that this isn't just a union with Christ. This is a union with the body of Christ, the church. As St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:17, because there is one bread, we are, who are many, are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. And then he says in the next chapter that we need to be careful, precisely because it is Jesus. You know, when you have the Ark of the Covenant, you don't say, well, if that's really God present in the Ark, why don't you just let everybody come up and touch the Ark? Because it's God in the Ark, and approaching him irreverently will result in you being struck dead, as we see in the Old Testament with Uzzah. And as we see in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 11, when St. Paul says, whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. And he tells us to examine ourselves, because anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment upon himself. That you won't just be struck dead physically, as with the ark, you'll be struck dead spiritually, which is much worse. And so when you read the writings of the church fathers, people like Justin Martyr in the 100s, it's very clear that the only people who were allowed to receive the Eucharist then were those who were baptized, believed what the church believes, and were living in accordance with that teaching. Those are the three criteria that Justin Martyr gives then, and those are the three criteria we still follow today, because they're rooted in the nature of what the Eucharist is.
Callie, more on that at Catholic.com. Also, call back. Oh, we'd love to talk with you. Joe Heshmire is our guest. It's Drop Calls today on Catholic Answers Live. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun. And that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heshmire does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heshmire explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, a little bit of groovy music there. Joe Heshmire, our guest. Boy, that's a lot of fun to have him one day. And we've got drop calls for Joe. Joe, I'll tell you what, I mentioned the cultural phenomena that is Shameless Popery, your podcast, but I'm gonna get to Jacob's question next. But we just make a little ad for Shameless Popery right now. Why should people visit Shameless Popery and become connoisseurs of the fine work that's being done there?
I mean, frequently when you hear people call in and we have a few minutes to answer their question, you may be left saying like, okay, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that. And so one of the nice things about the format of Shameless Popery is there's no ads, there's no hard start and stop time the way there is with radio. I can go as short or as long as a question needs. And so it's a good way of just going deeper on topics that warrant going deeper. And I can often explore kind of fun angles where it's just something where maybe nobody's even asked me about it. I've just discovered something I think is cool. And you'll find out very quickly. I have a nerdy idea of what I think is cool. But a lot of those things are just, it's a great way to get to share from the riches of the church, where not only is it a way where hopefully I can help answer questions you have, but maybe can show things that you didn't even know existed. They weren't even questions you knew to ask. And they can be really spiritually fruitful and profitable. So it's fun to get to do. I've enjoyed the conversations that it's kind of spawned. And so, yeah, that's why I do it. And hopefully that's why other people will want to join in.
And it's not Shameless Popery, it's Popery.
That's right.
So,
Although the YouTube automatic transcript generator, where it has like the closed captions and everything, it has a heck of a time understanding that basic point.
it probably thinks Popery is some sort of slander, and it's like, nah, I'm going to do that.
Yeah,
It's
I'm on a default in the non-bigoted
right.
direction.
Yeah, right. So you should, it's probably just being
I've
polite.
had speech to text do me dirty on that, like done the opposite, where
it makes it
I
worse?
say something completely innocent. Yeah, like I don't speak this. Like I felt like I'm regularly saying these words, and you learned it. Like why would you assume that was the word I was going to use?
Well, maybe it just doesn't like you. Maybe the machines don't like you, Joe.
It's trying to get back at me for
Boise,
Just
Idaho,
screaming it and yelling at it.
Salt and Light Radio. That's what Jacob was listening to. We love the folks up at Salt and Light Radio in Boise, Idaho, and all over Idaho. And Jacob called with this question. We weren't able to get to it, but here it is. What is the best argument for Catholicism to a Protestant who accepts the Nicene Creed?
Yes. So this is one of those ones where I would normally ask a follow-up question, but it's hard to do that because Jacob's just yelling at his radio right now, or maybe not listening yet. The place I'm assuming this is coming from is you've got a Protestant who says, look, I accept all the creedal formulas, I accept the Nicene Creed. Why do I need anything more than that? And part of that is actually in the Nicene Creed itself. So there's two things. Number one, when you accept a creed, it's not actually enough that you accept it in a way you would interpret those words. You have to accept it in the way the words are meant. So, like when it says one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, you'll have Baptists who will say the Nicene Creed and will redefine what those terms mean. But that makes a mockery of a creed. The whole point of the creed is this is a common faith that we can all profess together. And if everyone means something different by the words that they're saying, then it's not really a common faith that we're professing together. Like if I said, hey, we all believe in the Holy Book, but I mean the Bible and you mean the Quran and someone else means the Book of Mormon, we don't all believe in the Holy Book. We believe in different books we might all call a holy book. And so don't do that to the creed. It's important to understand it as the words were meant at the time. Well, this is also true when the creed says we believe in one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. And we can read the writings of people at this time to know what they meant by one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. And plenty of the church fathers in the 300s do things like preach on the creed and do commentaries on these marks of the church. And so there's a popular myth that, the Catholic Church just means all believers everywhere. And that is simply not what the Christians in the 300s meant by the Catholic Church. And so it's worth pressing, like, hey, if you think that's what they meant, show me the writings where they mean that. I actually did a video with Braden Cook, the catechumen, and I believe the title is Redeemed Zoomer Critiques the Doctrine of the Church, It Ends Poorly, where we go through this related point. Like when the Christians of the 300s talked about the Catholic Church, what did they mean by it?
Yeah.
Because you'll find Protestants today who are like, as I said, either they'll say, the Catholic Church is just all believers, or they'll say like, I'm Catholic, I'm just not Roman Catholic. And you need to understand, heretics have been doing this since the early days of the church, and the Catholic Church has never found this a clever or impressive argument. Augustine points this out in one of his letters against the fundamental epistle of the Manichees, where he just points out how ridiculous that argument is. I'm going to quote him here. He talks about why he remains Catholic, and he says, I'm going to give you a long quote if that's okay, Si.
Yeah. I'm kind of,
For in the Catholic Church, not to speak of the purest wisdom, to the knowledge of which a few spiritual men attain in this life so as to know it, in the scantiest member indeed, but there are but men, still without any uncertainty. Not to speak of this wisdom, which you do not believe to be in the Catholic Church, there are many other things which most justly keep me in her bosom. So all he's saying is, we don't have to debate whether you think there's some like special knowledge outside the church or not. Here are the other reasons. Number one, the consent of peoples and nations keeps me in the church. Number two, so does her authority, inaugurated by miracles, nourished by hope, enlarged by love, established by age. Number three, The succession of priests keeps me, beginning from the very seat of the Apostle Peter, to whom the Lord, after his resurrection, gave it in charge to feed his sheep down to the present episcopate. Number 4, and so lastly does the name of Catholic, which not without reason amid so many heresies the Church has thus retained, so that all heretics wish to be called Catholics. Yet, when a stranger asks where the Catholic Church meets, no heretic will venture to point to his own chapel or house. So, even if you're like, I'm evangelical Catholic, I'm Reformed Catholic, I'm Anglican Catholic, stop it. When somebody approaches and says, oh yeah, did you see what the Catholic Church just did? You're not like, you mean the Lutheran Church? Or if they're like, where do the Catholics, have Mass? You're not like, oh, here's the Methodist Church. No, everyone knows what we mean by Catholic. Everyone knows where the Catholic Church is. And so, as Augustine says to the heretics of his day, we know you want to be called Catholic, but we also know you know what the Catholic Church is. And so don't redefine the creed, one holy Catholic and apostolic. When we talk about the apostolicity of the Church, we mean the succession of priests that is tied to the office of Peter and tied to the succession of the apostles down to the present bishops. All of that is explained right here by Augustine. At the same time, so you would have to say, I affirm the creed, but I reject the way people at the time understood the creed, in which case you're affirming a creed that only agrees on paper. You're doing that thing where you said, oh yeah, we all agree on the holy book, but you mean a different book. So don't play games with the creed. Either accept the creed and come join the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, or acknowledge that you redefining the creed, reinterpreting baptism, reinterpreting apostolic, reinterpreting Catholic, just means you don't really believe in the Nicene Creed. Those are the two choices, and I hope you choose the first one.
Jacob, thank you for the question. Got time for another one before we have to take a break, and this one comes from Nashville, Tennessee. Josh was watching on YouTube, and he said, if someone who received the gospel of Jesus and believed, should the Church immediately baptize him, since we have a similar example in the Ethiopian eunuch?
So for the context there, if you're wondering what they're talking about, in Acts chapter 8, the deacon Philip gives instruction to the Ethiopian eunuch, and then after evangelizing him, the eunuch says, see, here's water. What is to prevent my being baptized? And so he baptizes him. On the same day he meets him. The early Christians didn't take that as the norm they were meant to follow. And they are going almost certainly off of the example of the apostles themselves, that the apostles weren't just baptizing people, sending them out without further instruction and hoping for the best. But we see from quite early on in the Church that there is a period of catechumenate where you prepare to be baptized and prepare for the Christian life. Now, I want to be clear. This is something in which we don't have an explicit instruction from God either way. Scripture does not tell us how we're supposed to do it. And so it's fine that we've taken different approaches at different times in the Church, and there are actually different approaches taken today. So if you are someone who's in danger of death, you can be baptized right now. Let's say you've got a serious surgery coming up and you're not baptized, and you say, I'm worried about the fact I'm not baptized. You can get baptized today. Or, you're going off to war or something like this. And it's so extreme that if the situation is such the priest is unable to baptize you, someone else, anyone else can baptize you if the situation is dire. So when that's not the case, we do a period of catechumenate, of some kind of preparation. We call it OCIA these days. Even there, this can be kind of individually modified if a person is prepared for baptism and prepared to say yes to what they're going to say yes to. And the idea would be something like this. The early Church did a 3-year-long catechumenate. 3 years of preparing you for the Christian life. Why did they do that? Because they were more worried about your soul than they were worried about the numbers. It looks really impressive if you have an altar call and 500 people run down and say they're going to give their lives to Jesus, and they say the sinner's prayer or even get baptized or whatever. And then maybe a month later, someone else comes through town and those same 500 people come down and they say the same thing. And the numbers look really incredible. And you say, look at this growth. But nobody's keeping up with them. Nobody is, investing in them. No one is helping them kind of walk in the spiritual life. We want to not do that. We would rather spend a longer time and make sure people know what they're saying yes to, and have the tools to really prosper spiritually as Christians. And so that's what we're doing in the catechumenate. And this was a need that was felt very profoundly in the early church, because to become Christian was in many senses a death sentence. That you knew Christianity would get you killed, or at least could get you killed. So we don't want you to take that lightly, because the last thing we want is for you to take that on and then to renounce the promises you made in baptism, to deny the faith, to apostatize. And because Scripture is very clear that that is actually worse than not getting saved in the first place. 2 Peter 2, Peter talks about this. Hebrews 6 talks about this. So we want that not to be what happens for you. The example I'd give kind of in rounding this thought out is marriage. There's different schools of thought about how long marriage prep should be for, because on the one hand, if a couple is ready to get married and maybe it's important for them spiritually, they get married soon so they don't burn, as St. Paul says, then yeah, there's a good argument to be made for a speedy marriage preparation and marrying people quickly. But on the other hand, marriage is a lifelong commitment. And we want to make sure you have all the tools that we can reasonably impart to you to help you prosper, to help you succeed. I've met many people who aren't practicing Catholics, maybe were never Catholic at all, who nevertheless, maybe they married a Catholic and will speak very highly of marriage prep because it gave them things that were very practical in their marriage. Well, similarly, our baptismal preparation is meant to give you tools you need to prosper in that lifelong commitment. So yes, short answer, people could be baptized right away. And they are in emergency circumstances, but there's a good reason why we don't do that as the norm.
That will bring us to a break. We'll be right back. We've got a nice question from an 11-year-old in Calgary, Alberta, when we come back. And lots more drop calls for Joe Heshmire on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Support for Catholic Answers Live comes from the Graduate School of Theology at Christendom College. Deepen your understanding of the Catholic faith through live online graduate courses, taught with uncompromising fidelity to the Church's magisterium, from Christology and bioethics to Mariology and more. This summer, you can also attend the Institute for Liturgical Formation on campus. Begin your master's degree or earn a certificate at graduatetheology.com. That's graduatetheology.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft 2 important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant Revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heshmire's our guest. I am Cy Kellett, your host. And all of the calls are in. We've got drop calls today. And we didn't get to speak with Nathan. He's 11 years old and lives in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and listens on the podcast. But Nathan, I'll tell you what, since you know Nathan is 11 years old, I would like an answer appropriate for 11-year-old. But I think a precocious 11-year-old, because here's his question. What are the theological differences between Catholics and the Orthodox?
It's a very good question. So I'm assuming he has just like an 11-year-old understanding of modes of procession within the Trinity.
I think that's I think I have an 11-year-old understanding of modes of procession in the Trinity, but I don't know what he's got.
I kid. So the biggest issue in terms of modern divides is probably the papacy. That the Eastern Orthodox will say, yes, there's some sense in which the Pope has always been in some kind of position of authority, but they'll say, number one, he claims too much authority for himself, and number two, they can reject his authority because they think he's wrong. Now, I don't think either of those arguments are particularly good, but very smart people on both sides have gotten much more in the weeds on that than I'm going to get into it right now. So the papacy is a big one. Historically, one of the issues that people forget about today is that there was a fight between the East and West over whether to use leavened bread or unleavened bread in the Eucharist. And the Catholic position is that either one is fine. That Jesus, when he inaugurates the Eucharist, very clearly uses unleavened bread because this is a Passover, which is the feast of unleavened bread. But it's also very clear that a lot of Christians were using leavened bread in the early church, and it's not clear that there is much in the way of writing about this early on. So there was a custom in the East of using leavened bread, and when they saw Western Catholics using unleavened bread, they were against that. And there was a lot of political controversy in the 9th century. Before the big schism, there was kind of a forerunner schism on who got to be the Patriarch of Constantinople. And so this is, I guess the other thing I should add, when you want to make sense of why the East and West split, a lot of it has to do with obnoxious politics, both church politics, like who should be bishop, but also just broader politics. That you have the East is speaking Greek, and they have the Roman Empire still there, now called the Byzantine Empire. And the West is a bunch of countries that are no longer under the authority of the Roman Empire. And so, or largely ignored by the Roman Empire, kind of left, and then, depending on when we are talking about in history, these areas, the Roman Empire just stops defending and sort of gives up on that part of the empire. So you have all sorts of politics that goes on there. And so a lot of the things people are mad about is just holding grudges for things that happened centuries ago. And so it's a little bit like asking, why do people in Southeast Europe, like in the Balkans, dislike each other? Well, some of it might be modern politics, but a lot of it is just historic grudges. And this is, in many cases, the exact same peoples involved. It's the Croatians and the Serbs, who's right, who's wrong in this thing that you did in my village 500 years ago. That kind of question comes up much more, if we're being honest, than it should. There was a massacre of the Latins in Constantinople. There was a sacking of Constantinople by the Latins in 1220. So you have slights in both directions, and you have people holding on to those things rather than forgiving. And, it's easy for me to say they should forgive because, I'm saying partly to forgive bad actions of Catholics. But I would also say the same thing. If there are any Catholics out there still mad at, the Greek Orthodox or then Greek Catholics for the way they treated Latin Catholics, they should get over that. They should move past that in the spirit of Christianity. So you have a combination of these things that we might think of today as fairly minor issues, like whether to use leaven or unleavened bread, all these issues like, the politics and everything of the day, in particular, the role of the Pope within all of that. But then you also have this technical theological dispute. And this is what people like to point to because it's a lot more respectable than just ethnic politics or national politics or ecclesial politics. They'll say, oh, well, we believe the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and not the Son. And Catholics believe that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. And I'm pretty convinced that's not the main reason for the schism happening, and it's not the main reason people are in schism from the church today, because most of the people who say that would be hard-pressed to tell you even what that means or why it matters. I think there is an important question to explore there, but I don't think that it is a basis to go into this kind of schism. So that's a rough and obviously told by a Catholic version of it, but I don't know that there's any major issues that I'm leaving off. But yeah, those would be the big differences that led to the schism and perpetuate the schism today.
Nathan, thanks for a fantastic question. I'm sorry we didn't get to speak to you this time, but I'm sure we'll get to speak to you again. Please call whenever you got a question. Let's see. On we go to Donald in Pennsylvania, who was listening on the Ave Maria radio network. Is there a list of infallible teachings that's been published?
No, I dislike this objection when it comes up. Now, I'm not accusing Donald of this, but Catholics will regularly point out to Protestants like, hey, you expect us to go with Scripture alone, but you don't really know which books are and aren't Scripture. And so this gets into this dispute about a fallible set of infallible books as opposed to an infallible set of infallible books. But also it's like, well, you did take 7 books out of the accepted Bible of the day. And so it's not just what degree of fallibility. It's a much deeper question of how do you know you have the right books at all? And it raises all sorts of good questions from sola scriptura. Because if you say you know the books from tradition, or because these are the ones accepted by the church, then you seem to be giving a really important authority to tradition and the church to create binding doctrine. Because if you don't think it's binding doctrine, then you'd be in this odd place of saying you have to do what the Bible tells you to do, but you don't have to believe a certain book is in the Bible. So, okay, you are bound by the teaching St. Paul gives on sexual morality unless you decide those books aren't in your Bible. And that immediately undermines the authority of Scripture if you can make that kind of move. And so Catholics point this out. And Protestants don't have an answer. Like, there is not a good answer to this problem. And some Protestants honestly and humbly admit that. This is a real problem for sola scriptura. This is a real problem for Protestantism. But others will just push back. And rather than answering it, will try to say, well, you guys are in the exact same spot. You don't have a list that is infallible of infallible teachings. And to that, I would say 2 things. One, we don't need an exhaustive list. We can know from the church whether a teaching is infallible or not. And even if we are unsure whether it's infallible or not, we can just follow it because it's still magisterial teaching of the church. So if you want a list of which teachings are at which levels of authority, Ludwig Ott has a book called Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma. He's not like the magisterium, but he's going to tell you these things were said with this degree of authority. And so it'd be a little bit like saying, well, we don't have laws in our country. We don't have like a court system, but you don't have just a list of every law that the Supreme Court has given a ruling on and what degree of authority it has. It's like, yeah, sure, the court's never given a list like that, but that doesn't mean we're in the same place of kind of anarchy, of having no authority that we can point to. Because if I want to know, is, say, the Immaculate Conception infallible teaching, the church has very explicitly said, yes, it is. The fact that it hasn't given me that for every level of every possible teaching is irrelevant. I can point to infallibly defined teachings that we know for a fact are held infallibly because Vatican I tells us what to look for, and then Immaculate Conception, Assumption of Mary, those kind of things meet those criteria. That is qualitatively different. So all that's to say, Ludwig Ott, if you're just trying to figure out the level of authority different things have, if you just want to know what church teachings are, pick up a catechism of the Catholic Church. If you want to know about like historic statements of the church, Denzinger, Denzinger, is a great kind of more scholarly compilation of all the prior kind of papal declarations and teachings and just sources of dogma. So those are things you can pick up depending on kind of how deep into this you want to go. But we are in a pretty substantially different position than the person who says, it seems to me these are the books that belong in the Bible, or I think we can trust the church got the New Testament right, but we can't trust the church got the Old Testament right. That person is just in a very different position in terms of the level of authority that they can proceed from.
Thank you very much, Donald, for the question. It's drop calls today, and we've got another hour of drop calls with Joe, and so many great questions. On that one, Joe, it does seem to me always that the core is very, very easy. It's not at all difficult to like on the major things. So around the periphery, you might have to do some research. You might have to because it's the periphery. It's not the core. And so a Catholic doesn't memorize every peripheral decision or conclusion that the church has come to.
Yeah, so I think, and even when we have, for example, one of the disputes right now is whether the canonization of saints is infallible. When the church says Saint so-and-so is in heaven, is that technically infallible or not? That's not a huge issue that someone needs to resolve before they can become Catholic. It just isn't.
Yeah.
I think they are infallible, but someone who takes an opposite position can still be a Catholic. It does not, people make a mountain out of a molehill on issues like this.
Right, but is God one? Not hard. It's really easy to know what the church teaches on that. So the core is not difficult at all. Joe Heshmire is our guest. Shameless Popery is his podcast, and we will continue with him. And we've got a whole stack of questions that came but never got an answer because we never got the person on air. We'll get to those right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heshmire, our guest. It's drop calls this hour as it was last hour. Whole bunch of drop calls. We get, well, I was going to say we get a lot of drop calls, but that's not how that actually works. We get a lot of calls, and then somebody pushes the wrong button. And we never talk about who pushed the wrong button around here. That is not important information. Joe Heshmire, apologist extraordinaire, debater, speaker, author of books and articles, podcaster, blogger. That tells you how old he is. Blogger and father.
He used to, use
husband.
pigeons just to send things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how his blog used to get out. Thanks for coming back.
Smoke signals and carrier pigeons. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember your smoke signals were fantastic in the old days. Yeah, it was when you would light the fires in Gondor, and then it would come over to where's that?
Nice.
Where would
I was trying?
Yeah.
Yes. Good work, Darren.
Yeah, Darren rescued me from
my
mind cramp. All right, you want to do more drop calls, or you want to just talk about nonsense? What would you like to do, Joe? We'll give this.
I want to do a little bit of both.
Really?
90% drop, 10% nonsense. How about that?
You really?
It was more like the other way around.
You feel like that's fair to inflict 10% nonsense on the listener? You feel like that's a fair ratio?
I mean, it's just a little bit of a tax, you know.
It's a 10% tax. That's right. That's the way people should listen to it. I will give you 90% of what you want, but I will be a taxing person for the other 10%. I think,
taxing person is a great description.
I think that's a. All right, let's go to Donald. We did Donald in Pennsylvania. And Donald, thank you for the question. Let's go to Joseph in Ontario, Canada. He was listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. How culpable are people of other religions when it comes to not following Jesus?
It depends on how much they know in the sense that matters to Jesus. So this is when we're talking about the rejection of Christ, we're looking at two factors. Was this a free rejection, and was this a knowing rejection? Because God is present on some level in the lives of everyone and has revealed some things to everyone. But that can sound kind of like fun and hippy-dippy, like, oh, look, we're all going to be saved because God has revealed things to all of us. And that might be true in a world without original sin and human, free will, where we reject the things that God has made known to us. But St. Paul is very clear in Romans 1. He says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who by their wickedness suppress the truth." So he's not saying that's true of every pagan. In fact, he's going to make some important distinctions. But he is clearly telling us there's a category of people who it isn't that they don't know, it's that they don't want to know. They are suppressing the truth, not ignorant of the truth. And so this is a category of people that exists. And Paul says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Now, obviously, Paul does not mean somebody living in a faraway country just went outside one day and was like, oh, I get it. The Trinity's real. Well, I'm going to reject that. No. He's going to say, ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So they're without excuse, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. So some category of people, we don't know how large this category is, have received things that they need from God, that they should know there is a creator. He's not just part of nature because he created nature. He instead has eternal power and divinity, deity. And yet, nevertheless, they will reject this information. They'll do things, as Paul points out, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man or birds or animals or reptiles. So if you think this little statue of a God you created, that's the real God, that's not just theologically wrong, it's dumb. I mean, that's what Paul's saying. Like, you're being a fool. Obviously, this thing in creation is not the creator of creation. When you look at a tray of cookies, you're not like, oh, I bet one of the cookies baked that. because that is a dumb answer. Because the cookies were made by somebody. So who's the baker? Well, similarly, if creation is made by somebody, who's the creator? And that's what Paul is saying that people should have been asking and should have known. Now, some pagans were asking, but there are others who didn't want to go down those roads, were content with things that were just clearly not true. So when it comes to culpability, we can't just say everybody was just in ignorance and they couldn't have known better. Instead, we have to say that there's different levels of authority, or different levels of knowledge, excuse me. Because the flip side to this is that there are people who are ignorant, maybe not about God in general, but about certain things in particular. So Jesus on the cross can say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, even though he's dealing with the theological experts of his day, that even they don't have a complete grasp on everything, and maybe are less culpable as a result. So where does that leave us? Because the answer seems to be, how culpable are people of other religions when it comes to not following Jesus? It's all over the map. Some of them are extremely culpable. Some of them don't seem to be culpable at all because maybe they haven't heard of Jesus, but they've said yes to God as he's revealed himself to them. So what should we do? I would suggest two things. Number one, we should pray for the salvation of everyone, and we should hope for the salvation of everyone, so that if you've got like a beloved relative who tried to follow God, but maybe didn't come to a full and accurate understanding of Christianity before they died, we don't just immediately assume that they're in hell. Number two, we will strive for the full and complete unity of all of God's people within his church. That maybe they would have been saved by the incredible mercy of God, but let's not risk that. Maybe if you don't treat the disease that is potentially deadly, you'll still get better and you'll survive. But you don't risk it. You take the treatment. And in this case, the treatment for hell, the treatment for eternal death, is the gospel. So we accept the gospel in its fullness, and we administer the gospel. We share the gospel with as many people as we can, to bring as many people as we can safely within the fold of the church, where we don't have to ask these hard questions about how culpable they are and whether they're going to be damned for having rejected Christ.
Joseph in Ontario, Canada, thank you very much for the question. It's a drop calls show today. We've got a whole bunch of drop calls saved up for Joe Heshmire. I think we'll do a quick break, and we'll come right back with lots more drop calls for Joe on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
Joe Heshmire is our guest. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We're doing drop calls, and this one dropped. We haven't dropped a call from Ryan in Midland, Texas before, I don't think. I'm sorry we dropped you, Ryan. Ryan calls regularly. He was listening on the Catholic Answers Live app and said, how did the church select the popes before the conclaves? When did it fall on the shoulders of the College of Cardinals?
I like that description of it falling on the shoulders of the College of Cardinals. That was in the 11th century. And so prior to that, there were actually several different ways that papal elections happened. So 1059 is kind of the origins, more or less, of the modern selection process. This is when cardinal bishops are established as the electors of the Pope. In Nomine Domini is the papal document by Pope Nicholas II. Prior to that, there had been several different ways. Sometimes simply the acclaim of the clergy or of the people, that people would be presented with multiple candidates, and then they would, by just shouting, vote for one or the other.
Really?
Which is great, honestly. Yeah.
Nice.
Because you'll notice, so when it comes to choosing the first deacons, in Acts 6, this is laid out. The people have a selection process, and then they're presented, and then hands are laid upon them. An important distinction actually should be made here. Even in the days of popular acclaim, when people would vote, they didn't make the Pope merely by their vote. Something more is needed. And in the case of someone who's not a bishop, they have to be ordained as a bishop. In the case of the Pope, they have to accept it. And so if you're already a bishop and you accept becoming the Bishop of Rome, you are, by virtue of that, you are the Pope. So even when you're hearing this, that sometimes in like pre-400, this was done by popular acclaim, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic one. There are other times where like major influences would color the choosing of the Pope. This was like especially the Byzantine Empire. This is also the French, what was called the Frankish papacy. And then sometimes individual popes would make it very clear who they wanted their successor to be. And so they would just functionally be, more or less appointed by the person who came before them. And then later, the Holy Roman Empire would try to kind of establish this as well. So you've got this, and I think this shows the danger of, think about it like this way. The danger of democracy is going to be the meddling of special interest groups and foreign powers. And when you have the popular election of the Pope, the danger that it runs into is the meddling of foreign powers and kind of the special interest group of different empires or kings, etc. And so one of the ways that this is partially protected against is by having cardinals who then eventually have a conclave. So the conclave part, where it's all in secret under lock and key, that happens about 200 years after the College of Cardinals is established to help secure their independence. Again, for the same reason you have private voting in the U.S., that you're going to be less likely to be coerced if your vote is written down privately instead of you standing up publicly and saying this is who you're voting for. There's less risk of pushback or any kind of penalty, etc. So it's happened. The long answer is, I guess, it's happened in various ways, but the same basic mechanism has happened from at least 1276 to today, and a very similar one from 1059 to 1276 to what we have today.
All right. There you go. Thanks very much for the question, Ryan. Look forward to speaking with you again. Aspen in Minnesota was watching on YouTube and wanted to know this. Why do we have the books in the Bible that we do? And then the question continues, why did they remove those books in the Reformation?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and there's a lot that could be said here. Jimmy Akin has a good book called The Bible is a Catholic Book that traces some of this history, and I think he does a better job of getting the nuance in a readable way than most of the books I've read and the articles I've read and everything else, because it's very easy to oversimplify this. And I will tell you now, this is going to be a somewhat oversimplified version. But God revealed himself in many and various ways, as Hebrews 1 tells us. So the original, how does a book become part of the Bible? God inspires a prophet, or he inspires someone to write down the writings of a prophet. And they do. And then they share that with other people. And then there are copies of that made and passed around, or it is recorded and laid up in the temple. You have all of these kind of things. But significantly, these are happening one book at a time. It isn't as if you have the entire Bible just being handed down from on high by God. So they're on individual scrolls. And then, people gather them together, but your collection may not look exactly the same as my collection. You may have some that I don't have and vice versa, because individuals didn't own these scrolls typically because they were expensive and hard to produce. And so you would have them in public areas like the synagogue or the temple. Or maybe you'd have somebody who is, a well-read scholar who would have, individual scrolls, and then they would bring them out and read them publicly. So you have this, but one of the results of this is that you have some variations in terms of exactly which things are kept, which scrolls, but also which scrolls are regarded as scripture and which ones aren't. Because the mere fact that you have a book doesn't mean you regard that book as divinely inspired. It could just be like a good book of theology. So when you see, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have most of the same books that are in our Bible today, but they have a bunch of other books that aren't, and they don't have some books that are. So if you imagine like a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap, but there are also a lot of books that are not in the other side's collection. And this gets into a bunch of questions of, okay, well, how do we know which books they had that they regarded as divinely inspired? And if they're not leaving behind any instructions, a lot of this is scholarly guesswork based on, for example, what cave we find the books in. They seem to have had a special library just of sacred books. But we're having to kind of interpret that. So by the time of Jesus, there's broad agreement around the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and pretty wide but not universal agreement around this second section called the prophets. So you'll notice Jesus refers to, he doesn't say the Old Testament, he says the law and the prophets. But then there are other books, and not everybody agrees on that second section. The Sadducees famously don't accept the prophets as of equal authority with the law. They think the Torah is more inspired than the prophets are. But then you have these other writings, these kind of loose collection of writings. You've got like Psalms and Proverbs, Song of Solomon. You've got a controversy about Esther. You've got controversies about Daniel. You've got these books that are more borderline cases, and some people have them and some don't, and some regard them as divinely inspired and some don't. And so there's a long process within Judaism of trying to figure out which of those books are considered divinely inspired. And this is where we find the disagreement about the books that are in the modern Catholic Old Testament compared to the modern Protestant Old Testament. That there are 7 books that were all in this category of disputed books within Judaism and disputed books within early Christianity, where the church said, yes, these ones belong, but post-Christian Judaism said, no, we don't think these ones belong. So we don't just disagree about the New Testament, we disagree about the Old Testament. And the early Christians didn't find this to be a major problem. The fact that, their Jewish neighbors reject 1st and 2nd Maccabees is less of a problem than the fact that their Jewish neighbors reject Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah. So the important dispute wasn't primarily over which books were and weren't in the Bible, but there becomes this idea in early Christianity that, well, if you want to defend doctrine to your Jewish neighbors, you need to do it from the books that they accept. And that's actually a perfectly good principle. And so this becomes confusing when later writers read this, because they say, oh, okay, so all of these books are scripture, but 7 of them we can't use for establishing doctrine. Now, that is a misreading of the early evidence, because you can't use those as Old Testament books to a Jew because they don't regard them as Old Testament books. It's not that we as Christians can't use them to establish doctrines among Christians. But if you're trying to persuade someone else, they're not going to be persuaded by an authority that they reject. So that's how you end up in the situation where Christianity ends up with a 73-book canon, whereas Judaism doesn't have any of the New Testament and doesn't have 7 books of the Old Testament that are in our Old Testament. Flash forward to the Reformation, and one of the major issues in the Reformation involves purgatory, and so Catholics are quick to point out 2nd Maccabees certainly supports the idea of praying and making offerings for those who have died. And in response to that, one of the things people like Martin Luther and John Calvin argue is that, well, we don't even think these books belong in Scripture in the first place. Now, significantly, they didn't just attack those 7 books of the Bible. They attacked, it was a different attack. So John Calvin actually only attacked 6 of the 7 books. He was fine saying Baruch belonged in the Bible because Baruch is seemingly attested by Jeremiah, and for whatever reason, he's fine with Baruch. Martin Luther rejects those 7, but then wants to remove 4 books from the New Testament as well. So if you read the prologue to the New Testament books by Martin Luther, And the original German translation of the Bible, you can find the prologues as standalone text now. He writes about, for example, why he doesn't believe the epistle to the Hebrews is divinely inspired. He doesn't think it's the work of an apostle. He rejects revelation for the same reason, that kind of thing. So it's a much longer process within Protestantism, where first they say, okay, we're going to move these 7 books to a section called Apocrypha. They'll still be in the Bible, but because there's a dispute about them, we won't use them for establishing doctrine. And then eventually in the 19th century, the books are just removed completely from Protestant Bibles. But there's no authority that does that. It's actually just a missionary society decides that they're no longer going to fund the creation of Bibles with these 7 books in them at all. And there was no council, there was no authority, there's no guiding divine principle. It was just basically a company decided. And so that is a weird way that Protestants end up with their Bible. The Catholic Bible is a result of the early Christians discerning that these are the books that belong. And so you have regional councils like the Third Council of Carthage that say this. And then eventually you have this affirmed church-wide at the Ecumenical Council of Florence and then reaffirmed infallibly at the Council of Trent.
Thank you very much for that question, Aspen. You know what, Joe? You are kind of rocking and rolling. I got time to do another question before I got to take a break.
All right, let's do it.
Really? You don't need a nap? You're all right?
No, I mean, I'll do that during the break.
Okay. All right, very good. Another question from Canada. Lisa called from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. She was watching on YouTube. What church father writings about Mary would you recommend for a Protestant?
Okay, I just recommended a Jimmy Akin book in response to Aspen in the prior question. The Bible is a Catholic book. I'm going to give you another Jimmy Akin book as a recommendation. Look, Aspen and Lisa, if you guys hadn't been dropped, I would just say stay on the line and you could get the book for free. So I apologize. You're going to have to probably buy the book. But Jimmy has a book called The Fathers Know Best, Your Essential Guide to the Teachings of the Early Church. And it's a really helpful starting kind of reference point because it has relevant quotations on various doctrines from the Church Fathers. So, for example, in part 10, he has Mary, the Saints, the Miraculous, and then he goes through what different Church Fathers have said about Mary being full of grace, Mother of God, ever Virgin, intercession of saints, ongoing miracles, private revelation. And then you can read those quotations and you can find who said whichever thing you find interesting. And then you can go in almost all of these cases, you can find the full text of that writing online for free in English, which is just an amazing privilege that we have as modern readers and users of the internet. There are other books that do that as well, but you know, Jimmy's book is nice and readable and relatively short even in the scheme of things. So if you're wanting good resources, that's always a good place to start. There's other things you can do as well, but I think that's probably enough.
All right. Joe Heshmire, our guest, it's Drop Calls. It's a Drop Calls open forum, and he's going so fast on these that I can just keep giving him questions. So here we go. Grace was in Nebraska listening, of course, on Spirit Catholic Radio when she called. Why do Catholics believe that both species contain the body, blood, soul, and divinity if the consecration separates them? Oh, Grace, good question.
That's a very good technical question. The answer is because Jesus rose from the dead, that his body and blood are separated on the cross, and we are reminded of that in the separate consecration of the bread and the wine, and we say the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. But the reality is, now that Jesus has risen, you're actually receiving all of Jesus because he rose from the dead. So it isn't as if his body and blood are still separate. It's not as if his divinity is separate from his body, for instance. You know, he is whole and entire. And so when you receive either from the chalice or from the host, you're actually receiving all of Jesus. Concomitance is the nature of this idea. And this is one of the reasons why, even though it's very beautiful to receive both species, it's not strictly required. So if someone, maybe you have an insensitivity to gluten, or you have a problem with alcohol, or you're at a church that doesn't offer both species, or whatever the reason is, if you're only able to receive one or the other, you're still getting all of Jesus from a symbolic perspective. And I know it always sounds weird as a Catholic to say the Eucharist is real. It is also symbolic. Like the Eucharist is Jesus. The host also looks like his body. The chalice, the Eucharist and the chalice is Jesus. It also looks like his blood. So the sign value of body and blood are clearly represented in the host and in the chalice. But in terms of the deeper underlying reality, Christ is bodily present entirely in both places.
Man, I thought the music was going to start playing before you got to. You just don't even let the music start playing. You're just you're on a roll. Grace.
Yeah, every now and then I answer questions actually quickly. It's crazy.
That is crazy. It throws me off, Joe, when you do that. You're throwing me off. Grace in Nebraska, listening on Spirit, who was listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Thank you very much for the question. Joe Heshmire is our guest. Shameless Popery is his podcast. Whole bunch more drop calls coming up for Joe on Catholic Answers Live. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heshmire does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heshmire's here. And we got a bunch of drop calls for him. And I am very interested in this one. I kind of like the Bible historical questions when we get to them. And there is an odd thing in the New Testament of people getting stoned to death. Like Stephen gets stoned to death, and there's a point where they're going to stone a woman. And so stoning is definitely a part of the happenings of the day. But David noticed something that we need an answer for. David was in Kansas City when he was listening. He was listening on 92.7 FM. If the Jews couldn't kill Jesus, forcing them to send Jesus to be crucified, then why did they stone people?
It's a great question. I would expect nothing less from a fellow Kansas Citian.
Yeah.
And
Could I just add something to the question, Joe?
Yeah, please.
Even Jesus, there is a couple times where it looks like Jesus himself is about to either get stoned or thrown off of something, so it seems like it almost came to that a couple times with him.
Yeah, that's right. And significantly, when it almost comes to that, it's when the crowds are furious with him after his preaching in the synagogue. And so stoning was mob justice. It was a lynch mob. And so another way you can imagine the question in modern context is, why did the same people who engaged in lynch mobs insist on some criminals being prosecuted by the state instead of just trying to kill them themselves? And why was it foolish, not just morally, but politically, to assassinate somebody like Martin Luther King? And the reason is because he's this prominent political figure. That when you talk about the death of Jesus, mob justice isn't going to work because a lot of the crowds actually really like Jesus, and the Jewish leaders of the day know this. And so you can find incidents where a local synagogue is riled up and they're ready to throw stones, and yeah, you could get something like that. But if you are someone in the establishment, that's actually a pretty precarious outcome, because if it looks like you've just killed the guy who might be the Messiah, that looks really bad. But if, on the other hand, the guy who is the Messiah is found guilty in a civil trial and is executed, that looks completely different. This is, if you want, again, the modern context, think about the phrase lawfare. If you assassinate a political rival, that looks horrible. If you have a political rival sent to prison on charges that are ostensibly fair, that looks like your rival's a bad guy. So it's smart politics to try to do it by the state if possible, if the person is well known. So I don't think that they're resorting to the state because they actually care about the fact that they're not legally allowed to kill anyone. Like, that's what they say in John 18:31. When Pilate says, "Take him yourself and judge him by your own law," they say it's not lawful for us to put any man to death. Now, part of that is because crucifixion is a Roman punishment, not a Jewish one. And providentially, in the plan of God, as we see going all the way back to Psalm 22, Jesus is going to die by crucifixion. That will be the death of the Messiah. That wouldn't have happened if he had been killed by a Jewish mob, because that wasn't how Jewish mobs killed people. They killed people by stoning. So there's a bigger issue in terms of, obviously, the plan of God is for it to happen in this exact way. But from the leaders of those seeking to kill Jesus, I don't think that they are actually morally constrained by the fact that they're not supposed to be killing people, because even Pilate just sort of takes for granted that they can and do kill people, even though they're not supposed to. When he says, "Take him yourself and judge him," he's just like, you guys do this stuff. They do this to St. Stephen. They were going to do this to the adulterous woman. So Pilate knows. Both of them are trying to pass the buck politically because they know it will be very unpopular to kill Jesus. So they want him dead. They want to make it look like Pilate's fault. He wants it to look like it's their fault. And so there is this kind of, and then at one point, Pilate even goes to Herod and tries to argue that in terms of jurisdiction, because Jesus comes from Galilee, maybe it should be Herod's job to kill him. Like, no one wants to be the one with the blood of Jesus on their hands. No one wants to be the one who's actually just said, like, yep, we did this, because they know that Jesus is very popular with the people. And so that's what they're doing. They're just trying to find a way around that. Whereas with early Christians like Stephen, they are not worried that this is going to lead to a riot, and it doesn't. They're able to kill individual Christians, but Christian leaders, they throw the book at them rather than throwing rocks at them.
Got it. All right. David, thank you for the question. I want to ask you, Joe, I realize you're not prepared for this question, so I'm just asking this off the cuff. In thinking about that, I was also thinking while you were talking about the on the road to Emmaus, where the disciple says it turns out to Jesus, haven't you heard? Everybody's aware of what's been going on. Like, there's this how, like, in your view, when you read the Gospels and you reflect on this, how well known was Jesus in Jerusalem by the time of Holy Week? Like, how big a deal was he?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's hard to answer that question definitively, because he seems very well known from the Christian sources. And in comparison, we get only glancing kind of references to Christ outside of that. Now, the mere fact that a non-Christian writer doesn't talk about Jesus doesn't mean they didn't know about Jesus. And it doesn't even mean that Jesus wasn't important. I mean, you can think about any number of political figures or leaders today who we all know, but because that's not the focus of the show, we're not talking about them. Or even if you want to take something not controversial, like, we don't talk about Garth Brooks, but I know you know who Garth Brooks is. I assume you know who Garth Brooks is. I would be stunned if you didn't.
He's got friends in low places. Of course I know who Garth Brooks is.
Jesus has friends in high places. Well,
they're both, actually.
Anyway, I'm not going to go youth pastor on you. But the mere fact that somebody writing about a different topic doesn't mention, oh, and by the way, Jesus happened, isn't really good evidence that they didn't know about him. So it seems like a lot of people did know about him, particularly in Galilee and in Jerusalem, which were the two major areas where he did all of his preaching. I mean, he does a little bit outside of those areas, but I would suggest outside of those areas, he's probably not nearly as well known. But in Jerusalem, you can find a crowd of people who will herald him coming into the city. You can find a crowd of people, maybe some of the same people, who will call for his death later on. So he's clearly well known enough to have that kind of reaction. But it's also very possible that someone popular in one context is completely unknown in another one. I mean, honestly, in the world of Catholic apologetics, everybody knows who Trent Horn is, or whoever. But if you go and go to a sports stadium and you just nudge the person next to you and you're like, doesn't that Miles Teller look like Trent Horn? They will be like, I don't know who you're talking. Is that a friend of yours? And you'd be like, absolutely not. It's
absolutely not. I want nothing to do with that Trent Horn.
Exactly. But the idea that Jesus might be similarly well known in one area and relatively unknown in another seems to be the case. At the time. I thought you were going to actually ask in terms of the quasi-legal execution, not on the road to Emmaus, but the road to Damascus.
Because Paul was going out executing Christians. He's
asking for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so they can So he might bring them bound to Jerusalem, so they can have a religious trial. So there, it's clear that there's something more than just mob justice, but they're also not turning them over to the state there. But then later, Paul becomes big enough that he is executed by the state and not by the synagogue.
Yeah, so there's several different, but we have the modern idea of the church is in one sphere, the state's in another sphere, but that would not have been the case at all. The Romans would have allowed for religious authorities to have real world power where they could imprison people, maybe even execute people, but certainly imprison people.
Yeah, it's fascinating you mentioned this. I was just having coffee yesterday. I don't know what day that'll be when this comes out, but yesterday with Gideon Lazar, who's online at Byzantine Scotus. And he pointed out that even today in Israel, there are no secular marriages. And so if you want to marry someone of a different religion, you have to actually leave Israel because marriage is done by the synagogue or the church or the mosque. And none of the religious leaders in Israel are going to want to marry you to someone of a different religion. And so there is no secular marriage. And so the idea, and this sounds very strange in a modern context, but for a long time, the religious group in a particular area would have an important official role. And so that is one thing that you just have to understand historically is different than it is today.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. We'll get back to more drop calls for Joe Heshmire on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more. Alexian Brothers is a proud sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. For 800 years, these Catholic brothers have offered a prophetic and daring response to the gospel, serving Christ in the sick, the poor, and the dying. Is God calling you to be a courageous disciple? If you feel called to total self-giving as a religious brother in the mission of Jesus, call our vocations office at 847-264-8703. That's 847-264-8703. AlexianBrothers.org.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her two children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, "What are you here for?"
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Joe Heshmire, our guest, drop calls. And this call came from Indian Land in South Carolina. Luke was watching on YouTube. We were just discussing Father Jeff Kirby, who has at least one book for Catholic Answers Press. I think two books he's written for us is in, at least the last I heard of him, he was a pastor in Indian Land, South Carolina. But in any case, Luke's question is...
That, for the record, is the name of the place.
Yeah. It was not like a description. I was like... Well, that looks like Indian Land. Actually, if you're going to describe it, that's the whole country. That's America, isn't it?
Touche.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know we were going to get super political here. But
Is that super political? Is that really super political, or is that just a historical fact? There was one group.
Oh yeah, I
that
mean
was here
it's a
first.
historical fact. Yeah, it's a good.
I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I'm just trying to say. Luke asked this. How is it that the Orthodox Church is considered in schism? What do you think of that, Joe? I'm trying it out.
That was very Chris Check.
Very Chris Check. He insists that you don't say schism, it's schism. But so I tried it out. How is it that the Orthodox Church is considered in schism? I can't do it. But the Anglican Church is not. Seems like they have similar issues with unity with the Catholic Church.
Okay. First things first. If you Google schism pronunciation, there's an audio guide. You can look at the American and the British pronunciation. And the American pronunciation is schism, whereas the British pronunciation is also schism. I don't know what he's talking about.
Oh, that got mean there at the end. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Look, he's very well read. He's probably got some manual from 1874.
That's the thing is, you don't know when did he learn this pronunciation? You know,
Yes. But at a certain point, it is like when you try to say, no, don't say octopi, say octopodes, because that's the proper plural of a Greek word.
Oh, man.
It's a losing battle. You just have to.
But neither is correct. You know, the correct plural is octopuses. Like people think it's
octopodes would be because they think that octopus is.
It's not a Latin word.
It has a U.S. ending, but it's not. It's a Greek word. Platypus, same way. It should not be platypi. It should be platypuses, or if you're going to be faithful to the Greek, platypodes.
Platypudding. Can I just? I don't. Yeah, it doesn't come up as much with platypus. We don't in America. We don't talk about platypus as much as we talk about.
They're an odd duck.
Yeah. Okay, go answer the question, will you?
Okay, so how is it the Orthodox Church is considered in, we'll say, schism, but the Anglican Church is not. The Anglican Church starts out in schism, but then it gets worse. The story of Anglicanism, a lot of people know the first chapter of the Anglican schism. Henry VIII wants to get an annulment from Catherine, who he is lawfully married to. He actually had a dispensation to marry her. The church found that she had not consummated her marriage to Henry's brother, and because if she had, it complicated canon law. We don't need to get into all of that. But he had, basically given his word, and she had given her word that they had not consummated their marriage, so he was able to marry her. And then he comes back when he wants to put her aside so he can marry his mistress. He insists, actually, the church got this wrong. But Catherine continues to insist, no, I was telling the truth the first time around. And Henry's very obviously a liar. The fact he's making two opposite positions, he's obviously lying. And it's weird because the Anglican case for the annulment is basically indefensible. You have to say Henry either lied the first time or he's lying the second time, or you just say, but it would have been politically expedient to just look the other way and give him a bad annulment. But that's morally indefensible. So the church refuses to give him the annulment. So he goes into schism and declares himself the head of the church in England. And that's where you go from church in England to church of England, where it just becomes this separate schismatic body. In this chapter 1, in the initial days, the early days, you still have valid holy orders. And that's an important kind of dimension. This is 1534, I believe. That's when the English Reformation begins. So for the first 16 years, all the bishops and priests are still bishops and priests. They're in schism, but they still have faculties. They can still celebrate the Mass. They can do all this stuff. But once you are separated from the church in the 1530s, this just becomes, like a picnic for flies. Like all the different Protestant groups want to come over and turn the new church into a Protestant church. So you get these very influential Lutheran and Reformed theologians trying to shape the direction. Thomas Cranmer, very famously, is part of this whole story. And so now they start to introduce a bunch of different heresies, and then the Church of England starts to embrace those heresies officially. So they go from explicitly under Henry VIII believing in transubstantiation to explicitly rejecting transubstantiation as a superstitious fable. And so they have these major reversals where they start to embrace heresy officially, but they do something else as well. They change the rites of ordination because of the influence of Thomas Cranmer. This is what's called the Edwardine Ordinals in 1550 and then 1552. And Cranmer is very much a Protestant. And he believes that the priesthood, in the sense that Catholics have always believed in the priesthood, is unbiblical and false. He was himself a Catholic priest who lost the faith. And so he introduces all of these heretical novelties. And so as a result, they stop ordaining priests as that term had always been understood. They keep the term priest, but make it very clear that what they're trying to do is create ministers, not those who can offer the sacrifice of the Mass at the altar, in the sense that priests have always done that. So as a result of that, they don't have any valid ordinations. Like, think about it this way. To have the Eucharist, you need a priest. To have a priest, you need a valid priestly ordination, an ordination to the priesthood. And a priest saying, I deputize you as a Protestant minister, is not an ordination to the Catholic priesthood. Whereas the Orthodox, even though they're in schism, because they have the right theology of priesthood, their ordinations are still valid. Just as the first 16 years, the Anglican ordinations were still valid. But once they say, we don't actually want to ordain people to that priesthood, we want to ordain them to this new Protestant thing, we're just like, okay, well, that doesn't have the power to consecrate the Eucharist. And that's a point Catholics and Anglicans should actually agree on. Like, you don't believe in transubstantiation officially. You're not ordaining people to do that. So it shouldn't be insulting that we say, well, obviously we don't recognize you as one of us, the way we do with Orthodox priests who, like us, are offering the sacrifice of the Mass. So there's a really important theological difference that comes up in this context. And it's because of deliberate decisions that the Church of England made to reject the theology of the first 1,500 years of Christianity.
Again, I will say thank you very much to our I was going to say call, and it is true to say caller, but the caller that dropped. Should I go to Carl and send? I'm trying to think of the timing here because I have. Okay, so Carl, We got
a couple.
I should do a couple questions.
I think we got time to do a couple questions. Let's do Anthony in Texas.
Okay, Anthony in Texas. Okay, got a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do see Carl. Yeah, my bad.
Okay, Anthony in Texas is where I'm going.
Yes.
He was listening.
Let's do Anthony, Steve, and Carl. I think we can do a trifecta.
Really? You think so? Okay, Anthony. Do we know when Saint Joseph died? Is there anything in the Bible?
We know in the Bible that when Jesus is in the temple as a 13-year-old, that Joseph is there. And we know that Joseph does not appear at any point in Jesus' public ministry when he's 30. That gives us a 17-year range in which Joseph almost certainly died. It's not like he just doesn't care about what Jesus is doing. So sometime in there, but exactly when is mysterious.
Wow, you really are going to do.
Actually, I said 13. It was 12, but yeah. So in Luke 2, he's 12, not 13. Sorry.
All right.
So yeah, an 18-year range.
Stephen was in San Antonio, Texas, listening on 89.7 FM. On what level of reality does the Eucharist change?
It changes on the substantial level, and it does so in a sacramental way. Here's what that means. The Eucharist really is Jesus, but it doesn't look like Jesus. So the outward appearances, what are called the accidents, it would look the same under a microscope. It tastes the same, smells the same, all of those. Those are incidental details. Just like you could change your smell and your look, and you would still be you, Jesus can look and smell different and still be Jesus. So this is what we mean when we say the reality, the substance is what changes. But the other thing we say is that this is done by means or by mode of a sacrament, not what's called local presence, meaning that Jesus is bodily right now in heaven, And so even though he's made bodily present in the Eucharist, it's not in the way that he has to leave heaven to do it, that he's able to do this miraculously through a sacrament.
All right, so now I can do one more question.
I think so.
Carl in Sandusky, Ohio, listening on AveMaria.com, wanted to know, what are the weirdest things Jesus taught?
I thought this would be a good closing question to do with you, because
Yes.
if memory serves, you actually wrote a book.
I think you even asked me this question or something very like it when you did that very kind interview you did with me about the book, A Teacher of Strange Things.
So I have some thoughts about the weirdest things Jesus taught are, but I'd actually be really interested in hearing what you'd say to that.
Okay, 'cause I brought it
I'm
up.
going to start giving you more questions, just randomly be like, yeah, that's a hard one. What
do you think about it? And
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I mean, the answer that I gave years ago when you asked me this, also when I wrote that book, A Teacher of Strange Things, I will give again. Jesus, verse 53 of chapter 6 of John's Gospel. So Jesus, verse 53 and following, so Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him." That, to me, is the weirdest thing Jesus ever said.
You don't think that he just means, like, listen to my teaching, and then he just said it in a really weird way?
I think that is shocking what Jesus is saying there. If you are not shocked by that, you have lost your capacity to be shocked. It is outrageous.
I mean, many of his disciples are shocked by it. This is a hard saying who can listen to it.
Right.
Like, not just, I don't accept it, but, like,
what
that
are
is
you
so disgusting,
talking
I
about
want
is
you
the
to
proper
say that.
response
Like,
to that.
How dare you say that? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there is something really shocking about that. And the fact that he talks about drinking his blood. I've said this before, but if he just said, like, chew on me, you can say, oh, maybe that just means, like, listen to my teachings.
Yeah.
You know, man has not lived by bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. You can kind of get to a sort of, but when you go, the verb in Greek switches to gnaw, and so it becomes kind of just a
Gross.
trogon. Like, you're not, it's a little grosser. But then blood drinking, that's really just kind of a gross image. You've got, for example, the whore of Babylon in Revelation, where she's drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And in that's Revelation 17. And Revelation 18 says, all nations have drunk the wine of her impure passion. So you can imagine drinking in the sense of if Jesus said, I want you to kill all the Christians, that's okay. That might be what it means to martyr drink the blood of the body of Christ. Yeah, I'll go kill all the Christians. But I don't think that's the advice he's given us here. I think he's giving us something Eucharistic, not metaphorical, right?
Right. And I think when you make this tame, you completely eviscerate Jesus as the authoritative Son of God. It's insane to tame this. This is wild what Jesus is saying. If nothing else, every Christian should meditate on this constantly. What is he talking about? Now, I do, of course, know that the church has a well-developed answer to what is he talking about. But when you read this in the gospel, can you imagine an ancient person not knowing anything about Christianity reading this?
I've read some of the reactions of pagans who are just horrified by the Christian Eucharist and believe we're just cannibals. But I like this idea of, when St. Paul is writing in chains in 2 Timothy 2, verse 9, he says that he's wearing fetters like a criminal, but the word of God is not fettered. I wish there was a stronger, it's like the gospel is unchained. The word of God is wild, and don't try to tame it. So I like that. That's a good word of wisdom to end on, Si.
Right. Well, thanks. Thanks for letting me participate, Joe. I enjoyed participating. And it's read chapter 6 of John's Gospel. You want to really try to read that with fresh eyes. Joe Heshmire is our guest. Check out Shameless Popery. You can check out his YouTube.
And A Teacher of Strange Things.
Thank you, Joe. That's my book where I said Jesus says a lot of strange things. That's what the book says. Again, check out Shameless Popery. Check it out on the YouTube. And that will be it for us. We will see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.